Welcome to another episode of The Cynical Writer. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone that the best way to support this channel is to purchase my books, and I've left a link in the description section in case you're interested. Now, this is going to be an episode where I discuss my top 10 favorite writers as an author, the writers who have influenced me the most. And I know it's been a while since I've made an episode of The Cynical Writer, but I'm going to try to make them more consistently from now on, or at least for the next few months. But I wanted to discuss, the writers who I have found the most inspirational. Now, of course, this is good. Lists change all the time, so I'm sure that a few months from now that this list will be somewhat different. So you need to be aware of that and bear that in mind. So all a list really reflects is an author's current tastes in the moment. That's really all it reflects. But I'm going to start. Number 10 is coming in at number 10 is Charlotte Bronte. Now, unfortunately, Charlotte Bronte will be the only female author on this list. But I wanted to have at least one female author on the list. But Charlotte Bronte, of course, wrote Jane Eyre, and she brought, I thought, a very graceful and a very feminine sensibility to her writing that I quite appreciate, and that's why I loved reading Jane Eyre, because I got that sense of gothic sensibility while reading her, and I also picked up some nice literary words from her, like lineaments was a word that I picked up from her. And so for all those reasons, I truly do love Charlotte Bronte. I haven't gotten to Wuthering Heights yet, but which of course was written by another Bronte sister. But Charlotte Bronte is definitely a skilled writer, and one that I truly do admire. And of course, she brought a great gothic sensibility to Jane Eyre that I truly appreciate. So coming in at number 9 is Henry James, who of course wrote The Turn of the Screw. And the reason why I like Henry James is because he brought an elegant sense of atmosphere, of gothic atmosphere, to his writing, a very haunting sensibility. And which is probably why, in terms of like creating eerie atmosphere, he is probably my favorite Henry James. And of course, he was writing in the late 19th century when there was a lot of skepticism around spirits, and it was the age of science, so to speak. But still, even though it was starting to be the age of science, people were still very much afraid of ghosts and superstitious. So it's nice to see that contradiction. So Henry James is definitely an author who has influenced me in terms of writing, and that's why he comes in at number 9. Coming in at number 8 is Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, which I'm actually reading in the middle of reading right now, which I have read parts of Dracula before this, but because I've seen so many film adaptations of the character, I mean, I've seen many vampire movies and Dracula adaptations, there's not as much suspense reading it because I already know what's going to happen, but from what I've read so far, I truly do enjoy his writing style, and also the fact that he inspired so many movies that I absolutely love and enjoy. That alone makes him someone who deserves to be on this list. And because again, Bram Stoker, like Henry James, brought a tremendous amount atmosphere to his books, a tremendous amount of gothic sensibility that I truly do enjoy, and for all of those reasons, Bram Stoker belongs on the list, because especially I think he gives a very nice and graphic portrait of late 19th century London, which was somewhat different from early 19th century England and even mid-century England, because again, there was more industrialization. It was the dawn, basically, of the modern age, and therefore you have Dracula, who's someone who exists in the past, who is stalking everybody, and for that reason, I consider him to be a very noteworthy author. And coming in at number 7 F. Scott Fitzgerald, who of course wrote The Great Gatsby, and which of course some of you might know, The Great Gatsby partially inspired my book Silent Reckoning, because I drew inspiration from the 1920s from that book, and basically what some people have said, and I agree, that The Great Gatsby is the quintessential American novel about business and greed and the fall of Gatsby, who keeps chasing Daisy, his love interest, even though he can never really possess her or have her, and of course it all ends in tragedy. It's a very powerful story. I also love how economical The Great Gatsby is compared to many other books. The fact that it is less than 200 pages, and everything is very compact, and it doesn't waste a lot of time, is another reason why I like The Great Gatsby. And so Fitzgerald comes in at number 7 for that reason. Then at number 6 would be William Faulkner. Now, Faulkner was basically the quintessential writer of the South. He wrote very eloquently about the South, and of course, being from Kentucky myself, which is kind of not the deep South, but kind of the upper South. We're kind of the border, the bridge between Midwest and Deep South. So I can sympathize and understand a lot of the sensibilities in Faulkner's work, which because I can relate, especially his descriptions of the southern countryside, and also the heritage, the cultural heritage of the South, the history of the Civil War, and all of that, which a lot of the characters in Faulkner's work have been traumatized by. I can relate to Faulkner on a deep level, and of course he had a poetic mastery that was almost unrivaled in the generation when he was writing in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I would even say that I think that Faulkner might just be the greatest writer of the 20th century. I might say that, not the greatest writer of all time, but he might well be the greatest, or at least my favorite writer of the 20th century. And now, as we get to number 5, we get to Nathaniel Hawthorne, whose style has inspired me immensely, and of course I've picked up words from Nathaniel Hawthorne that I quite enjoy, like countenance and visage, words that have immense literary power. Hawthorne has inspired me immensely in that way. Of course, he wrote about Salem, Massachusetts, and then he wrote The Scarlet Letter, and then he wrote The House of the Seven Gables, and he wrote about New England in such a way that is just so haunting and eloquent that he provides this visceral sense that it's just hard, that he truly is a great writer for all of those reasons. And he basically described America in the same way that Dickens was able to describe England. In many ways, I consider Hawthorne as almost like the American Dickens in that way, in the fact that they lived during a similar time and had a similar style. But of course, but Dickens was primarily concerned with English affairs. Hawthorne was concerned with the American affairs. So for that reason, I would put him at number 5. Number 4 is Herman Melville, which Herman Melville, of course, wrote Moby Dick, which might just be the greatest single book ever written. And Melville has a masterful style, and I would consider that the way I've been writing lately, I would consider I'm been perhaps influenced by Melville in terms of style more than anything else, because he, had a very complex and used and I picked up many different words from him, and Melville definitely proved that one can use a bunch of complex vocabulary close together and still be considered a great writer, because he had such literary power in his word choice. And that's why Moby Dick is such a great book, because it has this sense. It has a poetic sensibility, but there's also this sense of power, of urgency, of an energetic power that I find to be very refreshing, which is why Melville comes in. Even though, and it's very interesting because I'm not even all that interested in boating or whales or anything like that, but he made it interesting. Melville took a subject that a lot of people wouldn't find interesting, and he made it interesting by evoking a deep sense of atmosphere. And for that reason, he's comes in at number 4. Coming in at number 3 is Charles Dickens. Now, of course, I've been reading a lot of Dickens lately. I've probably been reading more of Dickens than any other author lately. And of course, Dickens had what I believe, he was a great storyteller. He was able to combine. One of the reasons why Dickens was a very popular author during his lifetime. In fact, he was probably he enjoyed more fame in his lifetime than probably anyone before or since, and because he was able to combine complex literary ideas, but he was also managed to be entertaining at the same time. He was able to combine those two things and make them work, which is why he was enormously popular in his own lifetime. And this also was why, he was adored by millions of people. He also went on reading tours and everything. In fact, one of the reasons why I'm fascinated by Dickens is because I would like to have the success that Dickens had. Like, if I could choose an author where I could say I'd like to have such success, I would like to have the success that Dickens had, which would be difficult in the modern age, given the fact that it's so difficult to because people don't really read anymore. You can't really expect people to be interested in writers or reading on that level. But Dickens was a powerhouse in his own day, which is why I admire him so much. And of course, he also wrote one of my favorite books, The Great Expectations, which is a book that I absolutely admire and adore. And it's probably my favorite book because he was able to combine that literary power with a sense of entertainment, with a sense of engagement. And so he comes in at number 3. Coming in at number 2 would be Edgar Allan Poe, who I admit I have not read a lot of Poe recently, because I used to read a lot of Poe. I've read all of his major short stories. Now, there have been some lesser minor works that I haven't read, but Poe is really the author who got me into literature. He we studied him in the 8th grade, and I think the first, the Telltale Heart, I believe, was the first story that we read, and it was the first time that I encountered what I consider to be serious literature. And again, he had this haunting Gothic sensibility that I just absolutely fell in love with. And he basically sparked my interest to become a writer, which is why I place him at number 2. Even though I'm going to have to go back and read more of him in the future. But again, it's there's only so much time in the day, and there's so much to read. But also the fact that Dickens, was himself, because a lot of people don't realize that Dickens was himself a Southern writer, and the fact that he came from Virginia and was raised by kind of wealthy parents, adopted parents, and so And so he brought this sensibility to the South and to, I guess, more rural areas that I can relate to, because I have grown up in a similar environment. So like Faulkner, I can relate to Poe's experiences and all of that, which is another reason why I place him at number 2. Then coming in at number 1 is surprise, surprise, William Shakespeare. Who, of course, was not a prose writer, because prose, as we know it today, hadn't really been invented. But, of course, he was a poet and also a playwright. And the reason I choose William Shakespeare as number 1, because he had such linguistical power in his language and in his thoughts, that he makes even some of the other authors that I mentioned on this list look like juveniles. But he was able to use poetic language in a way that has really been unequaled even today, that he was able to talk about especially love and sorrow in such a way that no one else really has before or since. And for all of those reasons, Shakespeare is number 1, and will probably always be. And yes, some people say, oh, it's just because of the archaic language, that thee and thou. But even if you were to change thee and thou to you, it would still have the same poetic and emotional resonance. It would still have that linguistical power, because he was able to speak to your heart, to speak to your soul. He was able to combine elements of beauty, but he was able to describe physical beauty and the beauty of nature, and he was able to combine that in such a way that it an artistic symphony and a poetic symphony of senses and sensations, which has never been done again, and probably will never be done in the future. And for all those reasons, I consider Shakespeare to be number one. And so those are my, and in fact, I would say that I strive to be more like Shakespeare than any other writer. Not a carbon copy, obviously. All these other writers have influenced me as well, but I strive. But I would definitely love to be known as personally as the 21st century Shakespeare. If they were to put that on my tombstone, I would be happy with it. But that's just a little dream I have. But for that reason, Shakespeare is my favorite author of all time. And so that's my list for today. Again, this list could very well change in the future. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And again, make sure to check out my books in the description section. And until next time, goodbye.